All right, so this is exciting for me. Welcome to my first properly formatted full screen YouTube tutorial. I've been putting out tutorial stuff for a couple of years now, but I've mainly been making it for TikTok. So I figured it was about time to make the jump and do some full screen YouTube stuff. So it's gonna be on Vision 4X, which is a spectrum analyzer from Excite Audio. And it's been a heavily requested topic. Every time I would post a video, I'd get at least a couple people in the comments asking, what is this plugin? How do you use it? So I figured with all the Black Friday stuff going on right now, it would be a great time to post about it, show you some of the ways that I like to use it in case you're in the market for a new spectrum analyzer. Maybe you're on the fence about it, or maybe you already have it and you're just looking for ways that other producers maybe are using the plugin. A really quick background on this plugin itself: it was developed in partnership with Noisia. So for those of you who don't know, Noisia is a bass music trio. They are the goats. Whether you like drum and bass or not, go check out some of Noisia's stuff on Spotify or YouTube or whatever. Listen to how incredibly tight all their mix sounds are. They wanted to develop this plugin out of necessity. They were traveling between studios, often producing in less than ideal listening environments, which is probably the case for most of us. And they wanted a way that they could specifically see like the low end. They wanted to see the relationship between their kick and their bass, their snare, the phase relationship, all that type of stuff. Let's jump in. First thing, this is the full version of the plugin. I know that there's a light version out there as well. And this is what it looks like. There's these 4 different quadrants that you can resize depending on which one you want to really kind of dial in. I mainly use the spectrum analyzer here and the waveform analyzer down here. If you want, you can just hide these other ones that you don't use. I'm sure that these are both useful in their own right, but it's just not really part of my workflow. And the way that it's set up is an EQ kind of flipped on its side. The lower down we go, the lower the frequency is, and the higher up we go, the higher frequency. So we have 20K up here, and then we have like 30 hertz all the way down here at the bottom. You can open up the settings here, and these are the settings that I use, so feel free to copy them if you want. You can change the color on the analyzer here and a bunch of other things. But what I would recommend is however you decide that you like the layout and the coloring of this plugin, save it as a preset so that every time you open it, you're looking at the same settings and you get a feel for how things are supposed to look. Let me play a few seconds of a track so you can see how it looks on the visualizer. The darker the color, the more energy is coming from that frequency. So as you probably guessed, this kind of L shape here is the kick drum. And obviously we have a ton of energy coming from that, and our kick drum's pretty loud in house music. And you can see that that lines up with the waveform down below here. This is the hi-hat right next to it, and you can see that the hi-hat's represented up here in the higher frequencies. Then we have the bass that comes in halfway through. This is kind of the bass in orange here. And then the kick hits again. So you can kind of see how things are laid out. The first way that I like to use this plugin is during the production and mixing phase when I'm building out my track and I'm trying to situate the levels for my kick and my bass. What I'll do is I'll usually bring in a reference track that has some similar instrumentation or a similar groove on the bass line, and I'll see how loud they have their kick and their bass and the sub situated relative to each other. So in this case, I was using a Martin Eichen track as a reference. I'll play a little bit of that track, and then we'll hop back to our track and see how the levels of our kick and bass are comparing. Importantly, we want to make sure that when we're comparing, these tracks are volume matched. Otherwise, this comparison won't work very well. So again, this is our kick in this kind of L shape here, and then we have the bass that follows it, and this is our sub right here. You can see that the kick is dark red, meaning, you know, it's pretty loud, it's got a lot of energy. And then the sub that follows is loud, but it's not quite as loud, right? It's kind of this yellowy, a little bit orange, maybe a little bit red. Now if we hop back to our track and play it, there's a similar setup, right? We have our kick in dark red here. We have our bass and our sub that follows. So I'm comparing 2 completed songs here, but if I was in the middle of my production process still or in the middle of my mix, I could head over to my sub channel or my bass channel, maybe turn it down a little bit and see how that feels. We're not gonna get exact values for our kick and our bass, but as you get used to this plugin, you can get a really good starting point of like how loud your kick and your bass should be relative to each other. The second way that I like to use this plugin is to check if there's any phase issues going on in the low end. So I put together this really simple kick and bass line to illustrate. I'll play the kick first, and then I'll bring in the bass. The first thing that sticks out to me when I played both of them together is that the end of this kick got cut off a little bit, it seemed like. And the reason that's happening, you can see in the waveform as well, is the kick and the bass are out of phase, meaning the waveform of the kick and the waveform of the bass, they're kind of going up and down at opposite times. And we want to try and avoid this as best as we can on our sub elements, like our kick and our sub bass, because otherwise we run into a situation that we have right now where instead of this being a nice clean signal and kind of exit from the kick here into the sub bass, we're going to get a dip in volume right here. And that's not going to give us that nice consistent transition that we're looking for. So now that we can visualize this, we can figure out how we want to address it, right? And we can either go into the waveform and maybe move it manually. Let's see how that looks. Much nicer, right? We get a smooth transition into that bass. Another option is to adjust the side chain. So maybe instead of having the volume kind of come up here, we could drag this back a little bit to get that sub bass out of the way of the kick. The third way that I like to use this plugin is checking out the kick type. Not all kick drums are created equal, and I'm just gonna play a few kick drums in a row here so you can really see how different they look. So if we look at these 4 kick drums, for example, we can actually get a lot of information. The first thing that I like to look at is the overall shape. So with this first kick, for example, it starts around 200 hertz and then it just pitches down. And that's different than this kick, which starts around 200 hertz and then it pitches down, but then it seems to kind of hold a note or stay on a specific note. Same with this 4th kick here. It's playing more of a note and not just pitching down the whole time. The second thing that I like to look at is how much punch does this kick have in like the 100 to 200, 300 range. Because if I just hold my cursor here and we compare all 4 of them, the second kick has lots of punch in this like 200 to 250 range. But if I head over to this last kick, it's not quite as strong. You can also get a good sense of harmonics. So this little kind of green stripe, or these green stripes that are above the fundamental frequency of the kick, those kicks are likely going to sound a little bit more distorted, or you're going to be able to hear them more in that kind of like lower mid range because they have these harmonics playing on top of the fundamental. So I'm going to play an Odd Mob track, a Chris Lake track, and then a Mao P track, just so we can compare how different the kicks actually are. You're not going to hear any audio. I don't want these tracks to get taken down, but you'll be able to see it. First up is Vertigo by Odd Mob. So kick, we got the sub. Next is A Drug from God by Chris Lake. So this kick is mainly living in this like sub region, right? It has a lot less information in the low mid and kind of punch area compared to the Odd Mob kick. Now let's check the Mao P track. So the Mao P kick has a ton of punch in this area, and it's also one of those kicks that pitches down, and it's like a really long type of kick drum. If I'm starting to build out a track, like I might even pull this analyzer up at the very beginning to see what type of kick I have, to make sure that when I'm building out my kick and my bass line, it's gonna have that push and pull that I'm looking for, and it's gonna be like long enough, and it's gonna be sitting in the right frequency range and has enough punch, all that type of stuff. Another thing that I like to do, again, in referencing and like studying other tracks, is to figure out where certain elements are sitting, especially when I'm comparing like the mids or the mono signal to the side signal. So for example, a little while ago, I was mixing a song that had similar type of stabs to like that typical Odd Mob, like Losing Control. So one thing I was able to do is bring in Losing Control, volume match them. And then I switched this setting from stereo to side. And if you click this listen button, it'll actually solo the side signal. And let's take a look and see what happens when we play this Odd Mob Losing Control track. Again, this has a ton of great information. I know that these stabs have the most energy in this like 200 to 500 hertz region. It obviously has information above that too with this kind of like white noise distortion stuff, but a lot of the character for the sound, at least on the sides of the mix, is living in this like 200 to 400, 500 hertz region. And that's really helpful to know if I'm trying to EQ or saturate something to get it to have the same type of impact and sit in my mix in a similar way to these stabs. The other thing that's very helpful to know from this is that Odd Mob didn't high pass the sides below 100 hertz. Something that's really common to do is grab an EQ, put it in mid-side mode, and we basically just high pass everything on the sides of the mix below like 100 hertz or whatever. And yes, that can definitely help tighten up your low end in certain situations, but maybe that's part of the reason that these stabs have so much impact, right? Is because Odd Mob didn't cut out that below 200 hertz on the sides. So again, a lot of great information when you're referencing and studying other tracks. Another helpful place to use this plugin is in sound design. So let's say that we were designing a bass, or we had a preset and we were adjusting some of the parameters. Let's just make a really simple bass just to start. So if I'm sound designing this, like maybe I get to a point with the bass where I want to add some width, or I just really want a little bit more control over the sub or something like that. One thing that I can do, if I can visually kind of see how loud things are and where they're sitting frequency wise, is I might be able to do something like this. Like I could pan this oscillator a bit to the left, maybe pan this one a bit to the right. Let's maybe just change the wavetable here, just so it's something a little bit different. But maybe I don't want the sub part of this bass panned. What I could do is I can go into the waveform and just delete the fundamental frequency. And that should get rid of this sub frequency here. And then we can add our sub frequency back with this sub oscillator and have it be mono. And now I have a lot of control over how loud I want the sub, right? So again, it can help on the sound design side of things as well.